The millionaire sees the nanny dancing with his paralyzed son. What he did next shocked everyone. It had been almost 2 years since the accident that took Laura, the woman Ethan Miller loved more than his own life. He still remembered that morning, the sound of rain against the windshield, Theo's frightened scream, and then silence. When he woke up in the hospital, Laura was gone, and their 8-year-old son, Theo, would never walk again. The house that once echoed with laughter now held only the soft hum of wheelchair wheels over wooden floors. Ethan tried to stay strong, burying himself in blueprints and work, but every time he passed Theo's door, his heart twisted painfully. The boy hardly spoke anymore, spending hours staring out the window, eyes distant, searching for something he could never reach. That morning, Ethan stood at his son's door, hand resting on the knob, hesitating. Tomorrow he would fly to Japan for a major project, 5 days away. It wasn't the distance that scared him, but the thought that when he returned, Theo might have retreated even deeper into silence. The new nanny, Sophie Reed, was the only thing easing that fear. She had come for the interview 2 weeks earlier. Soft voice, gentle smile, warm brown eyes. She told him she'd volunteered at a children's center caring for kids with disabilities and said something he couldn't forget. With enough love, every child can find their smile again. Ethan didn't believe in miracles, but there was something in her gaze that made him want to. He took a deep breath and turned the doorknob. The door creaked open, and he froze. In the middle of the room, Sophie was dancing. She twirled clumsily, arms in the air, making the silliest faces he'd ever seen. Her loose brown hair caught the sunlight pouring through the window, turning her into a streak of warmth in that long, silent room. And Theo, the boy who hadn't smiled in 2 years, was laughing, really laughing, his head thrown back, his small shoulders shaking as pure, bright laughter filled the air. Ethan's heart stopped. He stood completely still, afraid that if he moved, the magic would vanish. "Your turn, superhero," Sophie cheered. "Show me your power dance." Theo giggled, spun his wheelchair in little circles, lifted his arms, and moved along to some imaginary beat. He made a funny face, then burst into laughter again. Sophie joined in, her laughter ringing like bells. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He had forgotten what that sound was like, the sound of his son's laughter. The last time he'd heard it, Laura was still alive. Sophie suddenly froze mid-step, pretending to be a broken robot, her movements stiff, her voice mechanical, her face deadly serious. Theo doubled over laughing, and Ethan smiled, a real smile, the kind he hadn't felt in years. He slowly stepped back from the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. Something inside him stirred, a mixture of relief and something deeper, something close to gratitude, to hope reborn. In the living room, he sat on the couch, covered his face with his hands. For the first time in years, his tears weren't from pain. They were from joy. From the other room, Theo's laughter still echoed through the house, light, unrestrained, alive. That sound wasn't just saving his son, it was saving him too. 3 weeks later, the Miller house seemed alive again. Theo was talking more. Sophie filled the kitchen with laughter and color, and Ethan was beginning to believe that miracles might actually exist. But just as everything was settling, he had to leave for another business trip. Before heading to the airport, Ethan called his sister, Margaret Miller. Margaret was 8 years older, widowed, childless. In public, she was the perfect lady. Polite, well-spoken, poised, but beneath that polished surface lived a cold pride Ethan had known since childhood. "I need you to stay at the house for a few days," Ethan said. "Not to supervise, just to have family around in case Sophie needs help." Margaret paused for a moment. "A young woman in charge of so much. Yes, I suppose it's wise to keep an eye on things." The tone made Ethan uncomfortable, but he let it slide. He trusted that for 5 days his sister could behave. That evening, when Margaret arrived, Sophie greeted her warmly. "Hi, Miss Margaret. I'm Sophie. It's nice to meet you." Margaret's eyes scanned her from head to toe. Plain white t-shirt, old jeans, hair tied up simply. She smiled faintly, though her gaze carried an icy undertone. "Yes, I've heard about you. The new nanny. I hope you understand boundaries." "I just want to take good care of Theo," Sophie said softly. "Let's hope that's all you want." Theo appeared at the top of the stairs, grinning. "Sophie's teaching me how to bake cookies. Want to try some, Aunt Margaret?" Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's sweet, darling, but maybe it's better to let adults handle adult things." No one noticed it at that moment, but something shifted in the air, subtle, cold, and creeping. Margaret's presence spread through the house like a shadow, slowly dimming the sunlight that had only just begun to return. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. Margaret spoke politely, joined Sophie and Theo for meals, even complimented the boy from time to time. But soon, Sophie began to notice the tiny needles hidden beneath the sugar. "Your coffee's a little weak," Margaret remarked on Monday morning, her tone calm. "Ethan prefers a stronger brew. You'll get the hang of it." Sophie forced a smile. "I'll make another pot." Day after day, Margaret found subtle ways to belittle her. When Sophie set the table, Margaret would adjust each fork and mutter, "This isn't a diner. Try to show some refinement." When Sophie laughed with Theo, Margaret would interrupt, "Theo, don't make so much noise. Adults need quiet." Theo lowered his eyes, and Sophie fell silent. That evening, Margaret entered the living room to find Sophie reading a bedtime story. "Haven't you cleaned the kitchen yet?" "I'll do it once Theo's asleep." "You really shouldn't try to be both the nanny and the friend. Distance keeps things professional." Sophie nodded, holding back her frustration. But inside, a quiet fear began to grow. The next morning, Margaret sipped her tea, watching Sophie over the rim of her porcelain cup. "You know," she said, "my brother can be very suspicious. If he sees someone getting too close to his son, he might think they have motives." Sophie froze. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing. Just be careful. I'd hate to see you lose your job over a misunderstanding." Her words were soft, but they stung like acid. Sophie didn't know whether to believe her. Ethan had always been kind, but if his sister said it, maybe she was right. That afternoon, Theo approached her with a storybook in hand. "Miss Sophie, can you read the rest of the story?" Sophie hesitated, forcing a small smile. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetheart. I'm a bit busy today." The light in Theo's eyes dimmed. From across the hall, Margaret watched, a thin smile curling at the corner of her lips. Over the next few days, the air in the house grew heavy. The laughter vanished again, replaced by silence. Sophie did her job, but kept her distance. Theo spoke less, retreating into himself once more. One night, as Sophie tidied up the hallway, she overheard Margaret on the phone. "She's so naive," the woman said coldly. "A few words and she believes everything. Ethan's blind, thinks she's some kind of angel. I'm just doing him a favor, helping him see the truth." Sophie froze behind the door. heart sinking. Every word cut deeper than the last. She didn't know that from the other side of the hall, a small boy in a wheelchair had heard it all too. The days that followed slipped by in silence. The house that had once echoed with laughter now held only the soft hum of wheels rolling across wooden floors. No more stories, no more jokes. Just quiet meals, averted eyes, and an air so heavy it felt like fog. Sophie woke up earlier than ever, doing her work perfectly, but every smile she gave now felt forced. She was afraid to speak, afraid to move the wrong way, afraid of one disapproving glance from Margaret. Theo could feel it. He didn't understand the details, but he knew something was wrong, that the house was turning back into what it used to be, cold and sad. And while Margaret sat back, proud of the peace she had restored, she didn't realize what was really growing inside that silence. Something darker, louder, unstoppable. A storm was coming. A storm called truth. It was Wednesday night, a light drizzle tapping against the windows. Margaret walked into Theo's room, where Sophie was neatly arranging his toys. Arms folded, she leaned against the doorframe. "Did Ethan tell you he values professionalism?" Sophie looked up, nodding softly. "Yes, he did." "Then why have you forgotten that?" Sophie frowned. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Oh, you know exactly what I mean. I told you before. Don't get too close to the child. But you insist on acting like his mother, laughing, hugging. How do you think my brother sees that?" Sophie's voice trembled. "I only want Theo to feel loved. He's been through enough." Margaret stepped closer, eyes sharp as glass. "Drop the act, Miss Reed. I know your type. Girls who cozy up to rich families, win the child's heart, and slowly take the mother's place. No, I would never. What do you want then? A better life? Or a wedding ring?" Sophie froze, tears welling in her eyes. Theo, sitting quietly on the bed, stared wide-eyed, terrified. Margaret didn't even notice. Her voice dropped, quieter but deadlier. "Let me be clear. You're being noticed for the wrong reasons. When Ethan returns, this will be addressed." She turned and walked out, the door closing sharply behind her. Sophie collapsed beside the bed, sobbing silently. Theo rolled his wheelchair closer, gently touching her arm. "Miss Sophie, you didn't do anything wrong." She looked up, her eyes red. "Listen, Theo. You didn't do anything wrong, and neither did I. We'll tell your dad when he's home, all right?" He nodded, but inside a new fear took root. The fear of losing the one person who made him smile again. Half a world away, in his Tokyo hotel room, Ethan opened his laptop for a video call. "Hey buddy, how was your day?" "Fine. Did you and Miss Sophie play today?" "A little. You look tired. Everything okay?" "I'm fine, Dad. Just tired." Ethan frowned. Something was wrong. Theo's voice sounded dull, lifeless. And Sophie. She never even came into view. Later that night, restless, Ethan opened the home's security feed. The living room was empty, the kitchen dark, hallways silent. Then he remembered. The hidden camera in Theo's room, installed years ago after one bad nanny. He clicked play. The screen flickered to life, and within seconds, his blood ran cold. There she was, Margaret, his own sister, spitting venom at Sophie. He saw Sophie shaking, crying. He saw Theo, terrified, trapped in silence. He saw everything. Ethan sat frozen for a long moment, his breath ragged. Then, with a growl that came from somewhere deep in his chest, he slammed his fist against the table. Enough. Within minutes, he was booking the first flight home. No more waiting, no more second chances. He knew one thing for sure. If he didn't stop this now, he'd lose everything, again. The plane took off past midnight. Ethan sat silently by the window, staring as the city lights below faded into the dark sea of clouds. In the glass, his reflection stared back at him. A man exhausted, eyes heavy with fury and regret. He thought that after everything he'd lost, he had learned how to protect what mattered. But he hadn't. He had let his own sister destroy the only fragile piece he'd managed to rebuild. The laughter of his son, the warmth of his home, the trust of an innocent woman. The images from the video replayed in his mind again and again. Sophie crying, Theo trembling, Margaret's face cold and cruel. Pain swelled in his chest, but beneath that pain, something else began to burn. A fierce, unwavering resolve. No more hesitation, no more excuses. This time, he was going home, not as a helpless brother, but as a father and a man ready to fight for his family. Ethan's flight landed in Oregon at dawn. He didn't stop at a hotel, didn't call the office, just grabbed a cab and went straight home. All through the ride, the images replayed in his mind. Sophie crying, Theo terrified, Margaret's venomous voice cutting through the air. When the taxi stopped in front of the house, Ethan hesitated. It looked the same from the outside, calm, quiet, but to him, it no longer felt like home. He opened the door carefully. In the living room, Theo was curled up on the couch, clutching his teddy bear. Ethan knelt down, brushing a hand through his son's hair. "Hey, buddy." Theo blinked awake. "Dad? You're home?" "I am. I thought you'd be back Friday." "Changed my mind. Tell me, Theo, what's been happening here?" The boy looked down. After a pause, he whispered, "Aunt Margaret yells at Miss Sophie. She says mean things. Makes her cry." "What kind of things?" "She said you don't like Miss Sophie, that she's getting fired." "I got scared, Dad." Ethan gripped his son's hand. "I'm so sorry, buddy. I should have kept you safe from this. It's over now, and I won't let it happen again." He found Sophie in the kitchen, pale, dark circles under her eyes. When she saw him, she nearly dropped the glass in her hand. "Mr. Miller, I thought you were still in Japan." "I came home early," he said quietly. "We need to talk." They sat across from each other. "Sophie, I know everything," Ethan said. "I saw the footage." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never said a bad word about you," he continued. "And I never doubted you. Everything Margaret said was a lie." Sophie covered her face, sobbing. "I thought you were disappointed in me." He reached across the table, touching her hand. "You saved my son. You have nothing to be sorry for." By morning, Ethan had made several calls. At 11, the living room was full. The family lawyer, their relatives, and Margaret, freshly awake and confused. "Ethan?" she asked, forcing a smile. "What's going on?" "You'll see," Ethan replied coldly. He set his laptop on the table and pressed play. The room fell silent as the video played, Margaret shouting, Sophie crying, Theo shrinking back. When it ended, no one spoke. Ethan broke the silence. "Margaret, do you have anything to say?" She stammered. "This is taken out of context. You don't understand." "Enough," Ethan cut in. "You crossed the line when you hurt my son." She gave a nervous laugh. "You're overreacting. She's just a..." "No. I've never been clearer in my life." He turned to the lawyer. "Read it." The lawyer unfolded a document. "Effective immediately, Mrs. Margaret Miller is to be removed from all family inheritance and trust arrangements. All financial privileges under the Miller estate are revoked." The words hung heavy in the air. Margaret's face drained of color. "You can't do this." "I already did," Ethan said. She looked around, searching for support, but everyone avoided her eyes. For the first time in her life, Margaret realized that power meant nothing against truth. Ethan stood. "Pack your things. Leave my house today. I won't let you hurt this family again." Margaret stumbled back, tears welling. "You'll regret this, Ethan. That girl will show you who she really is." Ethan met her gaze, steady and calm. "I already have, Margaret, and she's not the one I regret knowing." She turned and stormed out, the door slamming behind her. No one moved. Sophie sat trembling, tears streaming down her face. But this time, they were tears of relief. Theo rolled his wheelchair over, taking her hand gently. "Miss Sophie, it's okay now, right?" She smiled weakly through her tears. "Yes, Theo, it's okay now." And in that moment, Ethan realized he hadn't just reclaimed justice, he'd found his heart again. That afternoon, the house was bathed in sunlight. No more shouting, no tension, just the smell of freshly baked cookies and Theo's laughter echoing through the kitchen as Sophie dabbed flour on his cheek. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching quietly. Something in his chest softened. The anger, the exhaustion, the pain of the past week. All of it began to fade. "Theo, stop making a mess," Sophie said, laughing. "But I'm helping." "Helping? Then who's cleaning up?" "Dad!" Theo yelled proudly. Ethan chuckled and stepped inside. "I heard that, young man." The room filled with gentle laughter. Sophie glanced at him, her eyes still tired, still red, but bright again. After dinner, Theo fell asleep on the couch. Ethan covered him with a blanket and turned to find Sophie at the sink, washing dishes. Her shoulders looked fragile under the soft kitchen light. He walked closer. "Thank you," he said. She turned, surprised. "For what?" "For staying, for not giving up, even when everything went wrong." Sophie hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I couldn't leave Theo. He needs me. And maybe I need both of you too." Ethan looked at her, his voice low. "You know, after Laura died, I thought I'd never feel anything again. I worked, I survived, but I wasn't living. Then you came along, and suddenly everything changed." "Ethan," she whispered. "I don't know when it happened, but one day I realized I needed you. Not just for Theo, for me." The room grew still. Sophie turned away, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't say that. I'm just an employee." Ethan stepped closer. "No, Sophie. You're the reason my son smiles again. The reason this house feels alive. The reason I want to live again." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I'm scared. Scared of losing it all again." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You won't lose anything this time. I promise." She looked up, meeting his gaze. There was no distance left between them, only warmth, understanding, and quiet connection. "Ethan," she whispered. "I'm right here," he said softly. In that moment, all the pain and fear of the past seemed to dissolve. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic words, just two broken souls finding peace in each other. From the couch, Theo stirred sleepily. "Miss Sophie," he mumbled. "You're staying forever, right?" Sophie smiled through her tears. "If you want me to, I'll stay." Ethan smiled too. "Not just Theo, Sophie. I want you to stay too." The setting sun poured golden light across the kitchen floor. And in that warm, gentle glow, three people, once strangers bound by loss, began to build something new together. Not a job, Not a duty, but a family, quietly reborn from love. 3 months later, Ethan's little house by the woods was filled with laughter again. Every morning, Theo rolled out of his room shouting, "Miss Sophie, pancakes, please!" And Sophie, no longer the nanny but part of the family, would laugh back, "Then my little chef better help me cook." Theo giggled, wearing his tiny apron while Ethan sat at the table watching them both, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, wrapping them in gold. It was peace, the kind he thought he'd lost forever. After breakfast, they went outside. Ethan was building a small stone path so Theo could wheel himself around the backyard. "Can I help, Dad?" "You can be the chief architect." Ethan grinned, handing him a small brick. Theo beamed. "Sophie, we're making our own park." "And you'll be the manager," she said playfully. Life was simple but full. That evening, after Theo fell asleep, Ethan and Sophie sat on the porch, listening to the chirping of crickets. She sipped her tea and murmured, "You know, sometimes I still worry this is all just a dream." Ethan looked at her. "If it is, I never want to wake up." She smiled softly. The scent of pine drifted through the cool air. "I used to think I'd never be happy again," she said. "But Theo and you changed that." "No." Ethan shook his head. "You changed us. You taught me that family isn't something you have. It's something you build together." Her eyes shimmered with tears under the porch light. "Ethan," he took her hand, "I'm not ready for big promises yet, but I know this. I can't imagine my life without you in it." They didn't need more words. Silence said everything. On Sunday, Theo's school hosted Family Day. "Dad, Sophie, you both have to come," he begged. "Of course," Ethan said with a grin. At school, Theo proudly introduced them. "This is my dad, and this is Miss Sophie. No, my mom, Sophie." Parents nearby chuckled. Sophie blushed, surprised by how right it sounded, and Ethan kissed his son's hair. And somewhere in that quiet house, laughter bloomed again, a sound that promised every ending could become a beginning. As Theo joined a game, Sophie whispered, "It feels strange hearing that word, Mom, but also beautiful." Ethan nodded. "Because it's true." Later, driving home, Theo slept in the back seat, smiling even in his dreams. Ethan took Sophie's hand. "You know, I once thought I'd lost everything, but maybe all that loss was just leading me here." "Here?" she asked. "To my real family?" She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. The evening sun poured golden light through the windshield, painting their faces with warmth. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't haunted by the past or afraid of the future, only grateful for the present moment, where he, Sophie, and Theo belonged together. A family, not perfect, but real. And that, finally, was happiness. A year after the storm had passed, Ethan, Sophie, and Theo's life had settled into peace again. Then, one rainy afternoon, the phone rang. A nurse's voice came through softly. "Mr. Miller? Patient Margaret Miller was admitted last night due to a drug overdose. She's stable now, and asking for you." Ethan paused for a long moment before replying, "I'll come." When he entered the hospital room, the woman who once carried such pride was now only a shadow of herself. Margaret was pale and frail, her hair messy, her face hollow. When she saw him, tears welled instantly. "Ethan, I'm sorry. For everything. I destroyed what I should have protected." He stood quietly, no longer angry, only tired. "You hurt this family," he said slowly. "But you've paid the price." Margaret bowed her head, sobbing. I regret it every single day. I don't expect love, just forgiveness, so I can go on living." Ethan sighed, his voice calm. "I forgive you," he said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean we're still family." She looked up, desperate. "You don't see me as your sister anymore?" He shook his head gently. "Family isn't just blood. It's trust. And you broke that." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Finally, Ethan stood. "I'll cover your treatment and help you get to a recovery center. But after that, we go our separate ways." Margaret tried to smile through her tears. "Thank you, Ethan. I understand." He nodded and left. Outside, the rain fell heavier, echoing softly against the glass. Walking away from the hospital, Ethan felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because he finally understood. Forgiveness isn't about opening the door again. It's about knowing when to close it. Sometimes, kindness must have boundaries, and love, to endure, must walk hand in hand with clarity. Time passed, and winter slowly faded, taking the old wounds with it. Ethan no longer thought much about Margaret, though sometimes, in quiet nights, the memories returned, not to haunt him, but to remind him that people can fall and still rise again. He wasn't angry anymore. Only a quiet sadness remained, like a scar on the skin, no longer painful, but always there to remind him of what he'd survived. Inside the small house, life moved gently forward. Sophie was studying, Theo was growing, and Ethan found himself smiling more often. Each morning, he heard laughter in the kitchen, smelled freshly baked bread, and realized peace doesn't come from forgetting the past, but from learning to live with it and still find joy. A year passed, and everything settled into its own rhythm. Sophie was about to finish her nursing degree. Theo was stronger and happier than ever, and Ethan, for the first time in years, felt ready to take the next step. It was time, he thought, to close the circle, not as an ending, but as a new beginning. Spring returned, the first since the hospital call, and with it, a softer light than any they'd known in years. The Miller home had changed, not just in paint and furniture, but in laughter, in the smell of baking, in the quiet peace that filled every corner. Sophie had just graduated from her nursing program. When she walked across the stage, Ethan stood in the crowd, eyes shining with pride. When she stepped down, he was waiting with a small bouquet. "Congratulations, nurse," he said. She smiled. "I wouldn't have made it without you." He shook his head. "No, Sophie. Without you, I wouldn't be here at all." That night, they celebrated with pizza and cake. In the middle of dinner, Theo suddenly asked, "Dad, Mom, Sophie, why aren't you two married yet?" The room fell silent. Ethan glanced at Sophie. She glanced at him, and both laughed. "You think we should get married?" Ethan asked. "Of course." Theo grinned. "Everyone says it's weird to be in love but not married." Sophie blushed, and Ethan chuckled. "Then maybe it's time." A week later, under the soft glow of sunset, Ethan led Sophie into the garden. Amid blooming roses, he knelt down, hands trembling slightly, but eyes steady. "Sophie, you came into my life when all I had left were broken pieces. You picked them up and made me whole again. So now, I have to ask, will you walk the rest of this road with me?" Tears filled her eyes. She nodded. "Yes." The ring was simple, but the moment glowed brighter than gold. In that silence, they held each other, their hearts beating as one. Months later, the wedding took place in the backyard. No fancy decorations, Just white flowers, warm lights, and the people who truly mattered. Theo wore a tiny suit, sitting proudly in his wheelchair, holding the ring box with both hands. He was the happiest ring bearer the world had ever seen. As Sophie walked down the flower path, everyone smiled. Ethan's gaze never left her, the woman who had turned loss into love. When she reached him, the sunlight caught her tears, making them sparkle. After the vows, Theo took the microphone. His voice was small but clear. "I just want to say, Dad and Mom Sophie taught me that love is when people stay, no matter what happens. And I think that's why we're all here today." No one held back their tears. Sophie cried, Ethan laughed softly, and Theo reached out to hug them both. Later that night, when the guests were gone, the three of them sat beneath the glowing lights in the garden. Sophie rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. He held her hand and whispered, "I used to think family was something you're born into, but I was wrong. Family is something you build with love." She smiled, and we built ours right. The moon rose over the quiet garden, silver and kind. They weren't rich, they weren't perfect, but in that little corner of the world, they had everything that mattered. A real family, built not by blood, but by love.